Good afternoon, Mr. Alexander. If we could start first of all by 6 months on from the election and from forming the coalition government, looking back, would you now admit that joining a coalition with the Conservatives was in fact a mistake for the Liberal Democrats?
No, I definitely wouldn't. In fact, I think the opposite. I think that when the election took place, the country was in a very difficult place, particularly with the economy, national finances, enormous deficit, problems with public debt and so on. And what the country needed was a stable government, one that could be sure of delivering what the country needed over the next 5 years. And, we obviously negotiated hard in those coalition negotiations to make sure that we had a coalition agreement that reflected both Liberal Democrat policy commitments and Conservative policy commitments, and I think we're well on the way to delivering many of those things. But most importantly, we're delivering the deficit reduction and the economic stability that the country desperately needed when the election took place.
Okay, we'll come back to that in just a moment, but is it not the case really that the Lib Dems are just there to make up the numbers for the Conservative Party, and in fact they've just joined there to get a faint sniff of power, and on getting that sniff of power, starting to abandon all kinds of things the Lib Dems previously stood for?
No, quite the opposite, in fact. I mean, if you look at many of the things the government is doing, they're things that come from the Liberal Democrat manifesto. So we have, for example, set out to increase the amount of income you earn before you pay any income tax at all. We've said that we're going to reach the goal of £10,000 that we set out. We've said that we're going to invest more money in education, particularly for children from disadvantaged backgrounds, because we think that's the best way to try and ensure that people have best possible chances in life. So
okay, and speaking of best possible chances, particularly through education, though, one particularly big announcement that was made recently was the potential to raise tuition fees in England for universities up to £9,000. Before the election, the Lib Dems promised not to do that. That's a complete.
There are quite a number of things we're doing to advance life chances. One of which is the pupil premium in education. So there's additional money going to schools in England, not in Scotland. That's for the Scottish government to decide to support children who receive free school meals, to try and make sure there's more resource for the disadvantaged. And the same is true in higher education. What we're seeking to do there, in a situation where the country's finances are very tough, where we're part of a coalition where we knew before the election that neither Labour or Conservatives supported our policy, is nonetheless to try and get the fairest outcome we can. So we've got a situation where a substantial proportion of students will actually repay less than they do at the moment, because we're raising the income level that you have to be at before you make repayments. So people, one of the myths about this is people do not pay any fees at all up front. It's about repayment of costs afterwards.
How can that be a positive thing, though, to have people with huge debts on leaving university? How on earth can that be taken as a silver lining to that cloud?
Well, the purpose of the policy is to share the costs of higher education between the state and the beneficiary of it, the graduate, and it means that if people get a benefit from university education, if they're earning £21,000 or more, they start to make repayments. You have to reach quite a much higher income than that before you repay your loans in full. We're also putting in place an additional scholarship scheme so that children from the poorest backgrounds, who are most put off, will have better chances of going to university. And also, I think one of the big problems, certainly as I talk to people in my own constituency, that affects people's choices about whether to go to university, is not about repayments afterwards. It's about the costs of being at university, where families actually have to provide support. And that's why part of our policy is to substantially increase student grants, so that students, again from families with low incomes, will get more money as a grant to help them with the costs when they're at university. I think that overall is a fair package in difficult economic times.
Okay, now a name that you may be familiar with is John Maynard Keynes. Now he was a Liberal from a few years ago now, and he abandoned the classical economic theory which said cutting public expenditure was the right way to go. He said you needed to increase spending to keep the economy going. Liberals used to stand by his theory and his outlook, such like Charles Kennedy. He used to be a great supporter of that. But now it appears the Lib Dems are following an utterly conservative agenda and going back to perhaps even Margaret Thatcher days, where cutting public expenditure is the way forward. That seems to be another abandonment of Liberal Democrat beliefs of yesteryear.
I'm not sure if Keynes was here that he would say that was a fair summary of his general economic theory, but we'll perhaps leave that to another interview. What we're saying is that the biggest economic problem that faced the country when we came into office was the fact that we had a huge budget deficit. Well, the budget deficit is the gap between how much we're raising in tax and how much we're spending as a country. So for every £300 we raise in tax as a country at the moment, we're spending £400. That means an extra £100 of borrowing. So let me just explain, because I think it's important to your listeners.
Just be aware that our listeners are school-age children who perhaps at this time are completely bored of politics as well. So
well, it was yourself who raised Keynes's general theory, so fine. I was just trying to answer your question.
That's absolutely fine by me, but just be aware that people that are listening to this perhaps aren't as entertained by politics as perhaps I am. So it needs to be at a level where people will be interested to listen.
Of course, but I'm trying to answer your questions directly, and you brought up Mr. Keynes, so I'm sure there are many people at school who study economics who followed these things very carefully too, and I don't think I should assume that folk listening to this don't understand these issues. I think that they do very well, because they're very important issues facing the country, actually. So what we have to do is make sure the country lives within its means, that we're not borrowing more and more and more money, because if you just let borrowing get out of control, debt get out of control, as it has been in recent years, all that means is we're leaving the burden of paying off that debt to the next generation. To people who are at school at the moment, we're saying, right, well, that debt is yours to deal with. We're creating it. You can sort the problem out in a few years' time. I'm not willing to say that. I think we should take responsibility for sorting out that problem now. And more importantly than that, if we don't sort it out, that will make economic growth worse. So in fact, the policies that we're pushing through are a necessary foundation for economic growth in this country, to support businesses, to support people going out to work.
Okay.
So I think it is a very both. It's right in its own terms to have to sort out our public finances. We're not borrowing too much, and we don't have a big deficit. But also that is necessary to support the growth that we all want, to create the jobs we want in the economy over the next few years.
Part of creating jobs is to cut 500,000 jobs in the public sector.
Well, part of creating jobs is to have stability in our public finances. I mean, you can see from what's going on in other countries what happens when countries lose control of their budgets, and actually that's much worse. And the people it's the most difficult for are the poorest in the country. So I don't apologise for it at all.
Okay. As the government is making all these cuts, there was research published back in May, actually, when you weren't actually a cabinet member, but it said that 18 of the 23 full-time cabinet members have seven-figure fortunes. They're millionaires. How can a government with more than 3/4 of its own cabinet as millionaires possibly relate to people who are out on the street losing their jobs?
Well, I don't know if that figure's true. I haven't seen it.
It was published in the Sunday Times back in May.
Well, I don't know if it's true. I haven't seen the research myself. I know that I'm not in that category myself, and certainly as a local MP, I spend a great deal of time here talking to my constituents, having surgeries, meeting people, as I have been earlier today, meeting school pupils, as I'm going to do later on with the Modern Studies class here at Charleston Academy, to make sure that that I have a good understanding of all the issues that are facing people. I think that's what every MP and every cabinet minister should do, and I know that's what my colleagues around the cabinet table do. People in politics come from all sorts of different walks of life and circumstances, and that means that across Parliament as a whole, you have, I think, a good understanding of all the different issues that we're grappling with.
And can you appreciate, though, that for normal people on the street, looking at a cabinet of millionaires making cuts to their jobs is perhaps difficult to stomach?
Well, I think that what we have to do as a government is explain why we're pursuing these policies, why it is the right thing to do for the country. And I appreciate it's difficult, and I know that every single decision that we make is affecting jobs, it's affecting services that people receive. But what we have to do is explain why it is necessary. We didn't create this mess. We came into office 6 months ago with a huge mess to sort out, with people asking all sorts of questions about Britain, which could have caused much, much bigger problems for our economy, would be much, much worse for jobs and growth. We're trying to sort out those problems, to clean up that mess that we inherited, and I think we're off to a good start in doing so.
It's interesting, though, that although you say that, trying to clean up the mess, when things were going well, particularly this week, where initial estimates published show that the UK may be growing again, the UK economy may be growing again, the coalition government seems to take credit for that, but then when things aren't going so well, it's cleaning up the mess the Labour Party left behind. There's perhaps slight inconsistency there.
I don't think there's any inconsistency at all. There's a huge hole in our economy. There's a huge deficit that we've got, which means that we're building up more and more debt every year. If we don't sort that out, then we'll have much, much bigger economic problems. And what you've seen since May, when we came into office and took some, as you say, very difficult decisions, actually one of the consequences of those decisions has been to stabilise our economy, to lower our interest rates. Lower interest rates helps people who are getting mortgages when they go out to work. It helps businesses create jobs. It helps investment in the economy. All those things are there to support economic growth. So I do think the steps that we've taken, though they're hard, though I know that they're difficult for everyone in the country, that they're going to support growth in the long run too.
Okay, and on a couple of local issues, how hard did you fight to save RAF Kinloss?
Well, we had a lot of debates about this, and we had to make some very difficult decisions on the defence front across the board. I think the important thing for Kinloss and for Lossiemouth is the decisions that we have to take about what future use bases are put to. Obviously, with Lossiemouth, there's a discussion involving the Ministry of Defence about where tornadoes should be based. I'm very keen to try and ensure that we avoid kind of real localised hotspots of unemployment, and that's something that has to be taken into account in making
Surely
those decisions.
that's a problem that's already going to arise with the closure of the base at Kinloss.
Well, of course, the closure causes job losses, and that's true wherever you close things, anywhere in the country. And what we have to do in those cases is to give every support to people who are affected to try and help them find alternative employment. And that's something that, working with Highlands and Isles Enterprise and Job Centre Plus and other organisations, we're trying to do. I think the decisions going forward, though, are about what do we do with the bases in future. And of course, we have issues like potentially service personnel coming back from Germany. The Ministry of Defence has to decide where those people go. So it's by no means the end of the line in these decisions.
Okay, and just on one other issue, it's to do with fuel pricing. The Lib Dems have been speaking about a fuel derogation of taking 5 pence off fuel tax. Where is that going to be rolled out, first of all?
We're going to start with pilot schemes in Ireland, so in Orkney and Shetland, the Western Isles, Isle of Skye, other Hebridean islands, Isles of Scilly off Cornwall. It's necessary to start at that because we have to get permission at a European level from all 26 other governments at a European level to start with a fuel duty discount pilot. Okay. We're negotiating with Brussels at the moment to push that through. It's something I'm personally very committed to doing because I know that the price of fuel is a huge problem for people across the Highlands and Islands, and I hope that once that pilot's in place and is seen to be successful, then we can look at whether it's something that can be extended further. That seems like the right thing to do.
Some criticism for it in that 5 pence is going to make very little difference in some islands. In some places it's 12 pence and even more per litre dearer than on the mainland. So 5 pence perhaps isn't really going to make that much difference.
Well, I think it will make a difference. And look, I mean, as an MP in the last Parliament, as opposition MP, I and my colleagues were campaigning for this. No previous government has been willing to do it. It's something that we have brought to this. I think that a 5p discount, as I hear from islanders myself, will make a difference. You're right, it won't fill the whole gap, but it will, I think, really help people in island communities to meet the extra costs that they face because of high fuel charges.
Is there any chance of raising that perhaps to 10 or 15 pence?
Well, we in designing the pilot, we have to make sure that we meet the European rules. Those rules relate to dealing with the extra costs of distribution and so on. So the 5 pence is the figure that we've set on. We'll do our level best to win support for that, to persuade other governments and the European Commission.
So would you be looking to increase it at all with the support of other countries?
Let's look. There's a long way to go down this road, so let's get the pilot in place first, evaluate it, see how it works, and then we can decide what to do from there.
Excellent. Mr. Alexander, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And enjoy the rest of your visit to Charleston.
I will. Thank you very much.
Cheers.